Glad to have you along. News Talk 800 WVHU. Al Benson Jr. Now lives in the South, but used to be in West Virginia during the famous textbook wars in 1974, 1975. He joins us now. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
You were, where did you live in West Virginia back in 1974?
We lived in St. Albans.
Oh, really? Okay. And how did you get involved in the famous textbook wars?
Well, it was kind of interesting. Back in 1974, in fact, actually, 36 years ago today, I read an article in the Chicago Sun-Times. We had just come back from a trip to Oklahoma. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I picked the paper up, and I opened it, and there was a major story in it, and the title of it was Battle of the Books in Fundamentalist Lion's Den. It was written by a Roger Simon. And I read the article. You know, it was the first I'd heard of it. I read the article, and I turned to my wife after I got through reading it and I said, you know, whatever it's happening there, those book protesters must be doing something right because this guy really bashed them.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Fundamentalist Lion's Den, that was West Virginia, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now for those who don't remember the textbook wars, and there's actually, there's a new book about it by Karl, and we're going to talk to him next week, as a matter of fact, and there's events marking the anniversary of that at various libraries throughout the state next week as well, so this is appropriate timing. But give us a little bit of the history. What were, and this was in Kanawha County, the Kanawha County Board of Education, whether they were aware of it or not, they were allowing textbooks into the classroom that had some very unacceptable material as far as parents and people of West Virginia were concerned.
Yeah, well, it should be as far as anybody anywhere was concerned. I mean, it was interesting. I read Karl's book, and I would recommend it to everybody. And he mentioned one place in the book that they went to one of the school board meetings, and somebody asked one of the teachers to get up and read some of the passages out of the book. And she thought, well, we can't do that in public.
Yeah.
Because the language was so bad that they couldn't say it in public. The newspaper couldn't print it, you know, and yet it was okay for the kids to read.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the YouTube video of this. It's unbelievable that here at a board meeting, a concerned parent goes to read from a textbook, and they said, "Oh, whoa, you can't read that here in front of these people with the language," but yet that was the very language was what they were pumping into the young people of Kanawha County.
Yeah, I've always felt that they used Kanawha County as a kind of a guinea pig, and they felt that they could get by with this kind of thing there. They could probably get by with it most anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, thankfully, they didn't quite get by with it. The people there resisted it. Had it happened someplace else, I don't know if the people, say in Chicago, would have resisted it or not.
Yeah.
I've wondered about that.
What were you doing in West Virginia at the time? What was your position?
Well, we were in Illinois at the time.
Oh, okay.
And after I read this article that I just referred to, I started looking for material in the papers to see what else there would be, And finally, through a couple of articles and through a couple of other conservative publications that I got some addresses, names and addresses, and I wrote to people there, and asked them, could you tell me what the deal is? And all I'm getting is what the news media in Chicago says, and that may or may not be accurate, So I did get hold of people in West Virginia and found out what was going on, which resulted in my wife and kids and I moving there in 1975.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. And this is relevant to today because, I just saw a story, I think it was last week, that in Texas, There's the Board of Education there's debating how Islam is shown in a very prominent way in textbooks, and certain board members say no. Not only is that wrong, but you're degrading or not showing the value of Christianity and Judeo-Christian values and influence on our country, but you are showing Islam in a prominent way.
Yeah, well, here again, this is something they do with textbooks. I mean, once I found out about this thing in West Virginia, I started watching, anything I could read about public schools, the books that we used. I've got 3 fat file folders in my file cabinet that have to do with what I call basically the subversion of public schools. I mean, it would take me a week and a half to read it all to you.
Yeah.
And it's from all over the country. Anything I could get, I grabbed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same type of thing basically goes on at the national level. I can think of one particular case. We used to live up in New England years ago,
mm-hmm.
and I can think of one particular case where in a high school, I think it was Warwick or Cranston, Rhode Island, I'm not sure which, they had a prostitute come in and talk to the kids.
Unbelievable.
That was part of the, part of the assignment, part of the agenda for the year, and the parents squawked about it and everything else, but it still happened, and this type of thing goes on all over the place,
mm-hmm.
and has gone on for decades. I mean, this is not anything new, because West Virginia was, 36 years ago now.
Right.
So I mean, it's been going on since, our kids were, my son was like 5 and my daughter was 2 when we went to West Virginia, where they first went to school in West Virginia. And we left there. We went to Indiana, and they went to school there. But they never went to public schools,
mm-hmm.
thank heaven.
Yeah.
After I read the stuff that I had read about public schools, I thought to myself, and my wife and I talked it over, and we said, no way are our kids going to those schools, not ever. And so we put them in Christian schools, for as long as we could afford it.
Mm-hmm.
When we couldn't afford it anymore, we did it at home because the public school was not an option.
Yeah. And today, it's much worse than it was 36 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just can't understand, and we have this debate, and I get into it with people, how Christian parents, people who call themselves Christians, they can send little Johnny and little Sally off to a public school that is totally anti-God. By its own admission, it's anti-God. They do all these things that you've already given examples of and more, and they don't allow prayer. The ACLU sues a coach in Central Ohio for praying with his football team, and these types of things. They've revised history to a way that is not true, and they have brainwashed our children. But yet people continue to send their kids there for this public indoctrination.
I wish I had an answer to it. I mean, I've run into the same thing every place we've lived in the country. The church we went to in Indiana when we lived there was where we initially decided, at that point, to homeschool our kids. And almost unanimously, the church was against us doing it. Some of the ladies in the church talked to my kids and said, wouldn't you really like to go to public school? Which they had no authority to do.
Mm-hmm.
And my son said, no, if you put me in public school, I'm going to quit.
Yeah.
I don't know if they sent him or if he came on his own. The pastor of the church came and talked to us.
Wow.
And tried to explain all the good reasons why we should put our kids in the local school there.
Oh, yeah.
They had some good conservative teachers, and they had a wonderful band program.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, I'm going to sell my kids' soul for a band program?
Yeah.
But this was where their minds were at.
Right.
And he listed all this stuff, and after he got through, I said, now I'm going to tell you why we're never going to do this. And I listed all the reasons to him why we would never put our kids in the public school. After I got through, he said, you've thought this out pretty well, haven't you? And I said, yes, we have. He said, based on what you told me, what I've suggested to you sounds just about almost blasphemous, doesn't it? I said, you're pretty close.
Yeah.
He never brought it up again.
I hope you got out of that church, Al.
Well, we did. We moved.
Yeah.
We moved to Illinois, and we left that church. I mean, there were good people there, but they just couldn't grasp it.
Yeah.
People today cannot grasp what these schools are doing, what they're doing to their kids. I mean, you get a couple of Christian teachers in there, and they think it's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got half a dozen friends that are Christians that either taught in public schools or are teaching in them, and none of them like what goes on.
Yeah.
To a person, they detest what goes on.
Right.
But there's not an awful lot they can do about it.
Sure. It's just a job. Now,
they've got to do it. I mean,
yeah.
If somebody that's 20 years into it, he's going to quit. He's going to lose his pension and everything else.
Right.
And I can understand why people stay in it, but having talked to all these folks,
yeah,
I know that they despise what they see.
Now, Al, you've got a blog. It's called cakewalkblogs.com. Your latest entry here is your government wants to control you and has a wonderful plan for your life.
Yeah.
Folks need to go and read that, and then they can also go to your website, which is Al Benson Jr., albensonjr.com. And I want to talk more about some of the things you have on that website when we come back. So let me take a break. Al Benson Jr. is with us. We're talking about the subject of education. When we come back, we're going to talk about the textbook revision of Southern history. That's when we come back on the Tom Roten Morning Show, News Talk 800 WVHU. And West Virginia textbook wars began, and it was about public school obscenity. Obscenity in books that children were being taught and were required to read. And the protests began as concerned parents brought this information before the Board of Education. And we're talking with somebody who was a part of the war and somebody who has since and ever since then become adamantly opposed to public indoctrination, or as we call it today, public education. And this week, there's been so much national focus on education. What's the problem? How come America's gone from being number 1 30 years ago to, number 20, number 30, whatever in the nation, in all these different categories? And Al Benson Jr., albensonjr.com is with us now. And Al, how did things end up as far as the textbook war in West Virginia?
Well, it ended up, we left there in 1977, and I was a little bit disillusioned because it seemed like the public school people had basically beaten the protesters into the ground. And there were times when they did that literally as well as, other ways. There
was physical abuse?
Oh, yeah. I can remember we went to a court here in one time, and I can remember there was a lady there about 60 years old, and I don't know if it was the deputy sheriffs or the police or what. They'd broken her shoulder.
Wow.
And I can remember another time that we went to hear when Ezra Grayley had been arrested, and we went to the hearing.
Uh-huh.
And it was at night. They seem to do a lot of these hearings at night for some reason.
Uh-huh.
And, the lawyer for the protesters asked the policeman, he said, "What did you arrest him for? What did he do?" And the policeman couldn't tell him what he did. He just arrested him.
Wow.
And he tried for 5 minutes to get, this officer to say why he had arrested Reverend Grayley, and he couldn't come up with a reason.
Yeah. Well, that's sad. It really is to think, just 30 years after Nazism, that this type of thing was going on in America, right here in West Virginia. And that's really, people say, oh, that comparison is ludicrous. No, it's not, because Hitler banned homeschooling. It's still banned in Germany today. People have to homeschool in secret. And it's all because Hitler wanted to control what was going into the minds of the young people.
Yeah, the protesters, when they started, thought they could straighten it out with the local school board. Well, they found out they couldn't. Then they started writing to their legislators, the state legislators,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there they went to Washington. Nobody could help them or would help them. Nobody would deal with the problem. They eventually found out that a lot of this stuff came out of the Health, Education, and Welfare Department, and this was an agenda to be implemented, and nobody was going to help them. I mean, this was going to go into the public schools no matter what the parents wanted. It's kind of like this current health care thing.
Uh-huh.
Nobody wants it, but they're going to force it down our throats anyway.
Right.
So much for elected representation.
Yeah.
It's gotten to be a farce anymore. And so nobody would help the protesters. And my way of thinking, and what they did was right. They said, well, we can't get any help there. We'll take our kids and form our own schools. Mm-hmm. And that's what they had to do. I wish more had done it instead of putting the kids back in.
Yeah. Many Christian schools, private schools, began around this time in West Virginia, and some of them are still going today because of the textbook wars, and many other people began homeschooling, though it wasn't widely accepted back then as it is today. In fact, homeschooling now is, if it was a district, it would be the largest school district in West Virginia, so it has grown quite a bit. We're talking with Al Benson, albensonjr.com. You can go there and read the Copperhead Chronicle. It's history and current events from a Christian pro-Southern perspective. And, Al, I tell you what, can you hold on another break here?
Yep.
Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk about some interesting perspectives here on Southern history, and particularly the war between the states, with Al Benson, who now he was in West Virginia back in the 70s, but is now in Louisiana. We'll talk to Al more about this when we come back on the Tom Roten Morning Show. And coming up on Monday, Kanawha County Libraries will be remembering the West Virginia textbook wars. They've got some special features there. And you can go to your Kanawha County Library to learn more about it. And then also next Wednesday, I'll be talking to author of a book about the West Virginia textbook wars, Karl, who was a public school teacher at the time. Now he's the head of Exodus Mandate in West Virginia, which is an organization dedicated to urging parents to get their kids out of the public school. And we'll talk to Karl next week.